Let's cover Chapter 11 homework. I'm in our class, so if you just go to our class and you go to resources and go to downloads, towards the bottom, kind of after the PowerPoints, there's an Excel file here called PV and FV formulas, present value and future value formulas. Already got it open. Looks exactly like this. When you pull this one up, you'll see this right here. For those of you who've had me in the past, I've used the same file in managerial finance and a few of my other finance classes. It's just kind of what I like to use to organize present value and future value calculations all together in one place. So you will be using this for your homework for the week. So I just want to make sure that you know that, and this will help you quite a bit. So let's go back into Connect. And now that you know where that Excel file is at. So I'm just in the Smart Book in Chapter 11 under Exercises. And just like I would do in the classroom, I'll go through quite a few problems together. Just make sure you've got a good representative sample of how to cover these. And then in the PowerPoint, I did a little review of the PowerPoint. There's some really good examples over there too. And the PowerPoint examples are the exact same examples that are in your chapter. So I think between what you see in your chapter, the PowerPoint, and then the examples I'll go with you through in the homework should give you a pretty good representative sample of problems to work on or look at when you go and do the homework assignments for points. So hopefully that's the goal. As always, if you've got questions how to do these, just let me know. I'm more than happy to point in the right direction or answer your questions or whatever it may be. I get a few questions per week, and I'm very happy to answer those for you guys. Okay, so the first one here is Akers Company, and this is bonds. So the first few questions will deal with bonds. And Akers Company, they sell in July 1 of 17, face value $100,000 bonds, 10 years, stated rate of interest is 6%, payable semi-annually, and that's a key word there. That means twice per year on June 30 and December 31. The bonds are sold to yield 8%. And so how much do these bonds sell for on July 1 of 17? So when you look at bonds and you get a question about what's the value of a bond, that's the present value of an ordinary annuity. Okay, so present value ordinary annuity. And the key here is a few things we got to look at. This is a 10-year bond, semi-annual. So there's an interest payment being made every 6 months for 10 years, 2 times a year for 10 years, 20 times. The market rate of interest, what they say is the bond yield is 8%. So the market rate of interest out there is 8%. So investors of bonds would expect to receive an 8% return when they put money into buying bonds. Okay, so that's the way to think about that. The stated rate of interest, the amount of interest literally printed on the bond contract, is 6%. And so that's all key information that we're going to use to value this bond. So again, when you're valuing a bond, you think present value of an ordinary annuity. So go to my Excel file right here, and it's organized. If you kind of remember this one, I've got it organized a few different ways. I've got present value ordinary annuity, present value annuity due. I've got future value ordinary annuity, future value annuity due. Then I've got future value of just simply an amount, present value of an amount. And I've got a few odds and ends at the bottom, solving for the number of years, solving for interest rate, solving for payment. And then the last one is computing what they call the effective annual interest rate. Okay, so these are all things, we're not going to use them all for this chapter. We're just going to use primarily one, the present value of an ordinary annuity. Okay, so this was, but let's go through and figure out what the payments are. So remember, it's a $100,000 bond, and it pays 6%. So the payment is the actual cash paid to the investors of the bond, to the bond owners. Okay, but it's 6% every 6 months, semi-annually. So I divide that by 2. So I have to divide that amount by 2. So it's 3,000. So every 6 months, I'm going to pay my bondholders $3,000. The future value is when the bond matures, it's worth $100,000, and I'll pay $100,000 principal back to the bondholders. The I is the market rate of interest or the yield. Okay, and the yield they gave us was 8%. So that yield, because this is semi-annual, I have to divide that by 2. So 0.08 divided by 2. And then remember, it was a 10-year bond, payable semi-annually, meaning twice per year, times 2 is 20. And so the value of my bond is 86,409.67. Now, pay attention in Connect if they're asking you to do that in whole dollars or pennies. If they're asking you in whole dollars, obviously we could round that and go 86,410. My answer sheet's in whole dollars, so just be careful about that in Connect. And make sure you're putting in the right amount based on how they want you to round. They will tell you when you do the problem. They'll make that known. Okay, so that was simple one to me, and that should look familiar. Again, I gave you questions like that for those of you who took managerial finance with me. In Brad's accounting class, I'm sure you did calculations like that and then turned it into journal entries most likely. Okay, so question 2, determining the market price following the change of interest. With this one, it says July 1 of 18, the market yield on Acres bonds described up above went to 10%. So what's the bond's market price July 1 of 18? So keep in mind, this is a year later, okay, and now the market rate of interest is now changed to be 10. It was 8, now it's 10. So over here it was 8, here it's 10. So a lot of the same information, the payment's the same, the future value is the same, but this is different. So it was 0.08 divided by 2, now it's going to be 0.1 divided by 2. And it's a 20-year or a 10-year bond, yes, but now we're 1 year into the bond. So now I take 9 times 2 instead of 10 times 2 because we're doing this calculation 1 year in the future. So I do that and I get my new value, which is 76,620.83, or to round it to be 76,621. Okay, so it's just taking that same scenario and just making a couple little changes to it. So still present value of the ordinary annuity concept. Okay, so that was question 2. Let's look at question 3. Question 3 says January 1 of 17. Now we have a new scenario. The market rate of interest was 14. Luba Corp issued bonds face amount of 500,000, interest at 12%, payable semi-annually. The bonds mature in December 31 of 16. And so it says here, what's the bond discount at issuance and how much of the bond discount should be amortized by the effective interest method on July 1 of 17. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the calculation. Again, present value of an ordinary annuity. And you have to do a little bit of the math here because you kind of have to figure out January 1 of 17 is all of 17, and then it matures in 2026, December 31. That is 10 years. That's a 10-year bond. And then the market rate of interest was 14%, or the yield. They kind of use different terms here on purpose. Up here they said yield. Down here they said market rate of interest. It means the same thing. And then the stated rate, the rate literally printed on the bond contract was 12, payable semi-annually. Okay, so that's kind of the key information you have to pick up when you do the calculation. Let's go ahead and calculate this one then. So this is a $500,000 bond, and the interest payable printed on the contract is 12%, and I divide that by 2 because it's semi-annual, and the future value is the principal of 500. And then the market rate of interest, or the yield, is 14%. Let me get that closed. So let's come back. And so 0.14 slash 2, that gets me 7%. And then this is a 10-year bond times 2 for the semi-annual. I get 447,030. Okay, so 447,030 is the value. That means the discount initially is the difference between 500,000, that amount here, minus the discount right here. That is, or I'm sorry, minus the principal. That'd be the discount, 52,970. But then what they want us to do is figure out a couple of, so the discount's 52,970, but the question wasn't that. The question was, I'm sorry, that was it. That part of it. How much of the discount should be amortized July 1 of 17? Okay, So the discounted issuance is the 52,970. But then the question is how much of that should be amortized away with the next payment in 6 months from now. And that's really the what we have to figure out. And so to do that, we have to take kind of a couple. Remember, we've got two different interest rates that we're playing with here. We've got the market rate of 14. We've got the stated rate of 12. Okay, so let's go back and do that. And I'm going to just do that on the next tab here. And so we're going to take this amount here, the 447. I'm going to round that just to say 447,030. Okay, so we've got that number. Let's go 447,030, and I'll put that number there. And then what I do is I multiply that times 0.07, and we know that 0.07 equals the market rate of interest. And then I do the same thing. I take 0.06, and I'm going to multiply. Let me do that different here. Plus 0.06. I'm going to multiply that also by 447, and I get 26,821. I'm sorry, that has to go by 500,000. My bad. Okay, 500,000. Okay, so I take the difference, and that's my amortization. So the market rate times the book value, the stated rate times the principal, and the difference between those two, that is my amortization. Okay, so 1292 becomes my amortization on July 1. And I can build a table to make that be more efficient to do it that way, but that's how you do it. So the difference between those two. So again, this was the market rate of interest times the book value, the 447, and the other calculation is the stated rate of interest times the 500,000 principal. And the difference between the two is how much I amortize away. So keep in mind, remember that 52,970 is amortized away every 6 months with every interest payment. So by the time we get to 10 years from now when the bond matures, that's gone. That 52,970 is gone. Okay, so that was question 3. Let's take a look at question number 4. Determining a bond's balance sheet value. It says here on January 2 of 17, West Company had 9% bonds in the amount of $500,000 maturing December 31, 2026. Bonds were issued for $469,500 to yield 10%. Bond interest is payable annually in this example, once per year. On December 31, West uses the effective interest method for amortizing the discount. On its June 30, 2017 balance sheet, what net amount should West report as bonds payable? So keep in mind, this is 6 months after the bonds are issued, but we have not made a principal payment yet. Okay, but even though we haven't made a principal payment yet, we still have to record the fact that in the last 6 months, we've incurred interest expense. Okay, so remember, you incur interest expense through the passage of time, and that's kind of the key thing to remember here. As time goes by, I incur interest expense. Okay, so that's the challenge with what we're doing here. Let's go ahead and calculate that one. I'm going to go just to my blank page here, and we'll do that one over here. So kind of keep in mind interest expense, what that would be. And now this, even though we're paying annually interest, it's 6 months later, I have to accrue for this. So what I do to compute interest expense, and this is going to be my debit. Okay, I'm a debit interest expense. I'm going to make an entry right here to do this one. And I take the 469.5, the amount we issued the bond at, and I multiply that by the 10%, and I divide that by 2 to calculate half the year. I get 23,475. Okay, so 469.5 times 0.1 divided by 2. Okay, so 469.5 times the yield of 10% divided by 2. Then I have to make a credit to interest payable. Okay, so credit interest payable. And that is obviously going to be a different amount. And that amount is 500,000. Okay, the principal times 0.09, the stated rate of interest, divided by 2. Okay, I get, whoops, I didn't do my math quite right here. I think I have too many zeros. There we go. So that gives me 22.5. So again, that was the principal times the stated rate of 9 divided by 2. We can go back, look at the problem. It's the 500,000, the 9% stated rate divided by 2. And so the difference between those two becomes my bond discount. Okay, this is my amortization. So the difference between these, just do plus and minus here, that gets me 975, and that's the amount of my bond discount. So this was just the accrual. If this was actually paying cash, I would credit cash instead of interest payable. And then in December 31, when they actually make the payment, they'll record the rest of this. Okay, question 5 is right here. Davis Corp issues 12% $1 million par 10-year bonds for 1117, and this is on Feb 1 of 15. Davis reacquires these bonds at 102 of par, so 102% of par, plus accrued interest on May 1 of 18, and retired them. The unamortized bond premium on that date was 78. So what is the gain or loss on the extinguishment of this particular transaction? That's the challenge here with this one. So I'll scroll down here. We'll do a section right here. So I've got the price. Okay, so this is the price to rebuy the bonds. We're going to buy them on the market or whatever we're going to do. Now keep in mind they could be callable. Callable meaning that we contractually we can exercise our right to buy them back from whoever owns them. That'd be in the bond contract. You can't just make them be callable after the fact. So when they were issued originally, we could have put in a call provision to say, if you buy these bonds from us, we have the right to buy them back from you at a certain price. We could definitely have said that. So, we'll buy the bonds at $1 million. So it's $1 million principal times 1.02. Okay, so we get 120,000. So that 102, when they said 102, just think that's 1.02. So we paid a 2% premium to buy the bonds back. Okay. We kind of make it worth the time of our bondholders to do that. Then I've got the face amount, and that was the original $1 million. I've got unamortized premium, and that was 78. And that should actually say premium. Okay, and let me widen that a little bit. And then we got 78,000. And the sum of those two, if I add those two up, I get 1078. Okay, and then that's my difference. So this is going to be a gain, and the reason it's a gain is the price I pay of $1,020,000 is smaller than the book value. So the book value is $1,078,000. I pay $1,020,000 to extinguish book value of $1,078,000. I've got a gain of 58,000. Okay. So almost always when you do a retirement, there will be a gain or a loss on that. Okay, the next one is question 6. And with this one, we have web company outstanding 7%, 10-year, $100,000 face bond issued several years ago, originally sold to yield 6% annual interest. Web uses the effective interest rate method to amortize bond premium. That's really the only method we're using, by the way. There is what they call a straight line method, and that's where the amortization is the same every year, no matter what. With the effective, it changes. It goes higher and it starts higher and goes lower as we make payments. On June 30th, 17, the outstanding bonds carrying amount was 105. So what amount of unamortized premium on the bond should Web report on June 30 of 18? So June 30 of 18, and you can see they kind of gave us June 30 of 17 what it was, and now we're a year later, a year after that, to figure that out. So we'll just build, in this example, we'll build a table. And this is actually probably the way that makes the most sense when you do these. So we have June's, I'll just say 6 for June of 17. And then we have June of 18, which is where we're at today. And then let me kind of start by making some headings here. So we've got interest payment, and then we've got interest expense, and then we've got premium amortization. because this was sold at a premium, and then we get to book value. And this is really the best way to do these. And so we know that book value, they told us that a year ago was 105. So we know a year ago book value was 105. So that's easy. We can just plug that number in. Okay. And then we need to kind of fill in the table. And the interest payment, if it's $100,000 principal, so if you remember that right here, and then 7% coupon or stated rate of interest. So the payment's based on the stated rate of interest. So I'm going to pay 7% of $100,000 in interest, in actual cash to my bondholders every year. So they get 7,000. My interest expense, though, is based on the principal times the effective rate of interest. Okay, or I should say not the principal, but the carrying amount. So the yield is 6% and the carrying amount is 105. So interest expense is 0.06 times the book value of 105. Okay, and I get 6,300. And so the difference between those two becomes my amortization. Okay, my premium amortization. And then my book value simply becomes the previous book value minus the new amortization. I get to 1043. Okay, so that's what my number is 1043. Okay, let's look at question 7. Question 7, Brower Corp owns a manufacturing plant in the country of Aust. We don't know where Aust is. December 31 of 17, the plant has a book value of 5 million, estimated fair value of 8 million. Aust government has clearly indicated it will expropriate the plant during the coming year and will reimburse Brower for only 40% of estimated fair value. And this is a real challenge for companies when they go overseas. You make a large capital commitment in a country that you believe that you're welcomed in, and you want to be there. They want you there. Governments change, policies change, and the government says, us and these tanks outside your door say that building is now ours, and we'll give you 40% of value. And you're like, oh, okay. So we know that. So GAAP is very clear that when you are aware of a loss, you book it. You don't wait for that loss to happen. So even though they're saying in the coming year, we book it today on December 31 of 17. And that's really the key with anything involving a loss. You're quick to record a loss. I know this loss is coming. I better book this loss right away. So that's what I do. I book that loss now to anticipate this. So let's go ahead and calculate that. And it's a journal entry, one you don't ever want to make. And remember, it says estimated. We don't know the exact loss yet. We're guessing. So estimate a loss on, I'll call it X, I'll just call it EXP for expropriation of plant. Okay, so I'm abbreviating severely. So estimated loss on expropriation of our foreign plant. And then I'm going to create an allowance account. So basically an allowance, I'm not going to type in the whole thing, but it's the allowance for loss on the plant. We'd have this big, long explanation for what that would be. Okay, let's make a debit and a credit. And it's not hard to figure out what the amount of the loss is, thankfully. So we know the book value is 5 million. Okay, and then I subtract from that 5 million this calculation here. The fair value of the plant, we think it's worth 8 million. And we believe that this government will pay us 40% of the fair value. Okay, so that mental math there tells you that's 320,000. So my gain, or I'm sorry, my allowance for the loss, I think I'm going to lose 1.8 million. Of course, then I credit this allowance account for that same amount. And so this loss goes to my income statement. The allowance for the loss goes to my balance sheet as a credit, as a contra asset account. So I would have on my balance sheet, I would have the book value of the plant of 5 million minus any depreciation. Well, it'd be 5 million is already including the depreciation. I'd then also subtract this allowance from loss from it to get down to the 3.2 million, which is what I think I'm going to get in cash. 40% times 8 million is the 3.2 million. So now I've written down my building to what I think I'm going to receive in cash, is essentially what I did. But I want you to realize that we recognize that in 17 based on what we think will happen in 18. So GAAP is very clear. If we believe we're going to recognize a loss, we are quick to take that loss. Okay, so we need to book this entry and probably think twice about ever doing business in the country of oust again. So question 8 is zero coupon bonds. They pay no interest. The only cash investors receive is a lump sum principal payment at maturity. So there is still interest. It's just not you're not making interest payments every 6 months or annually. Is kind of just lumped into the principal payment when the principal is repaid. That also includes interest. Yeah. So in January 1 of 17, Ledge Inc. issued $250 million of zero coupon bonds at a market rate of 12%. The bonds mature in 20 years. So what was the January 1, 17 issue price of the bonds? And then interest expense recorded in 17, interest expense recorded in 18. So to do this one, we need the present value of an amount. Okay, so present value of an amount. So this is $250 million, interest rates 12%, 20 years. So let's go back to my magic Excel file and we'll go to the first tab here. And this is present value of an amount down here. Okay, so the future value of this is 250 million. Okay, there it is. And this is 12%, 20 years. So the present value of that's 25,916,691. 25,916,691. Okay. So let's go back to my Excel and or just go back here and we'll just plug this number in over here. So let me just kind of find a new area. We'll just work this up here. Okay. Oops, I meant to pay special value. There we go. Okay, so there's my amount right there. And we want then to figure out what the carrying amount should be in a year from now and so on. So that basically part 1 is 25,916,691. And then if you recall question 2, let's go back to it just so we remember what it was, is how much interest expense should they record in 17? So for the entire year of 17, how much interest expense should we record? And so I take that 25,916 number, I multiply that by the 12%. So let's go ahead and do that. And I get that number right there, 3,110. Okay, that's in year 1. Now in year 2, let's just take the original principal plus that 3,110, add those up, 12% again, and again multiply. So this is now year 2, December of 18, and I get 3,483,203. So this is December 17, this is December 18. Okay, next, let's take a look at question 9. And this is floating rate debt. We had a little slide that talked about that. There's a page in your chapter that talks about it. So January 1 of 17, Three-Way Energy issues $200 million 15-year floating rate debentures at par value. It's a debenture is a form of debt. They pay interest on June 30 and December 31 of each year. The floating interest rate is set to equal LIBOR plus 6% on January 1 of each year. The LIBOR was 6% when the bonds were issued and 8% on January of 18, a year later. How much interest did Three-Way Energy pay in the debenture in 17? How much will it pay in 18? And then how much interest expense to record in the debenture in 17? How much to record in 18? It's not too hard to figure out, thankfully. It's pretty straightforward, just a little bit of mental math here and we'll have it. So the floating rate of 17 was set on January 1 of that year, which is 12% because it's LIBOR plus 6. The LIBOR on January 1 of 17 was 6, so 6 plus 6 is 12. Clearly, we all know that. And so 12% times the principal amount of the bond equals the interest in 17. So $200 million times 12% is $24 million. Okay, that was the 17 amount. In 18, then we take 6% plus 8%, which is clearly 14%. We all know that. And so now we take that 14% and we multiply it by the $200 million to get our interest rate, our interest. Okay. Now, question 2 is kind of a trick question. How much interest expense did they record in 17 and 18? The nice thing about these bonds is there is no discount or premium to amortize. So the cash paid is exactly the same amount as interest expense. So the cash paid equals interest expense, which is not the case when a bond that does not have the floating rate is sold, and then interest is paid. Okay, so with the floating rate, there is no discount, there is no amortization. The cash paid for interest equals interest expense. That's the key thing to remember. Okay, I'm skipping 10, so we'll move on past that one. I got to get to my right notes. We're skipping past 11 also, so let's get down to 12 and talk about 12. So 12 is right here, and this is about fair value. And so it says right here, January 1 of 17, Tusk Company issues a $300 million worth of bonds, a 6% coupon. The bond matures in 10 years, pays interest annually on December 31 of each year. The market rate of interest on January 1 of 17 for bonds of this risk class would be 6%. Tusk Company closes its books on December 31. Tusk elected fair value option to account for the bonds. So question 1, what amount will appear for bonds on their balance sheet on January 1 of 17? Okay. So let's just think through the journal entries and let's go from there. So let's go ahead and kind of think through the journal entries. And I'll just scroll down to a blank spot here. So first, we would debit cash, and then we would credit bonds payable. So BP for bonds payable. And this is just for the initial amount of $300,000. Okay, so that's the debit and credit. Now, I also, though, will need to, and that's the first question. So let me go back here. I'm going to get ahead of myself if I don't. So what amount appears January 17th? I just showed you that entry. That was a January 1 entry. Number 2, what entries will they make in 17 to record the effects of the bonds if the market interest for these types of bonds is 9%? What if it changes? Okay, so we'll come back and show that. So let's first of all go back to here. And so this was Jan 1. Now let's go to December. Okay, end of the year. So last day of the year entry. And let's record interest expense for the entry. And so requirement 1, and I probably got ahead of myself here. So what amount will appear? Well, keep in mind that these bonds, the coupon rate and the market rate of interest are the same. So that's why the entry here was there's no discount or premium because they were sold at par. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. So now let's record interest expense for the year. So we're going to debit interest expense and we'll credit cash. And because the bonds were sold at par, there's no amortization or anything to worry about. I should put the cash to the right here. And so let's do that. This is an easy entry because they made it simple for us. We take the $300 million. I realize I'm going to short some zeros times 0.06, and that's my number. And this needs to have more zeros. Okay, and so let's go ahead and fix that entry. And then this credit here is for the same amount as the $1.8 million. Okay, so let's go ahead and book those. So 18 million. So 18 million worth of interest for the year, 6% at $300 million. Okay. And then we get to probably the challenging part of the question, which is right here, which is the fair value. So we're going to record the fair value. Market rate of interest now changes to be 9%. So this is where it's going to be just a little bit different for us. And so we have to go through a process to change that and fix that basically. So what we do is